"Don't you move, mister. I said I'm not leaving you." A 7-year-old girl, small enough to fit under a kitchen table, pressed both hands against a dying man's chest and refused to let go. He weighed 260 pounds. He had 32 years of criminal record. He had a skull tattoo across his throat and blood soaking through every inch of his leather jacket. And she held him together with nothing but her bare hands and a promise she didn't fully understand. If this story moves you, subscribe. Right now, drop your city in the comments and let's find out together just how far one little girl's courage can travel. The morning Emily Carter disappeared from her backyard, her mother was on the phone with the electric company arguing about a billing error that had been wrong for 3 months. That was the kind of morning it was. Susan Carter was not a negligent mother. She was a tired one. There is a difference, and that difference matters enormously in what happened next. Emily had been playing near the old fence post at the edge of their property, the one her father had promised to fix before he left and never did. She had her red rubber boots on. She had her hair in 2 loose braids that Susan had done quickly, with a ponytail holder that had a little plastic strawberry on it. She was 7 years old and she was bored, and she had been told 100 times not to go past the fence. She went past the fence. Pelican Road was not a road most people use on purpose. It curved along the northern edge of Crescent Hollow, a coastal town in Northern California that most maps still got wrong. Locals called it the bypass because it bypassed everything: the grocery store, the gas station, the diner, the school. It bypassed life in a sense. It was a road you ended up on when you were going somewhere you probably shouldn't go. Emily followed the sound of the gulls at first. Then she followed a line of bright orange wildflowers that pushed up through the gravel shoulder. She wasn't thinking about danger. She was 7. She was thinking about whether the flowers would survive if she picked them and brought them home in her boot. She was crouching down to pull one up by the root when she heard the sound. It wasn't loud. That was the thing about it. It wasn't a scream or a crash or anything cinematic. It was a low, wet, awful breathing, like something large trying to pull air through a garden hose full of water. Emily stood up slowly. She looked down the slope of the gravel shoulder into the drainage ditch that ran alongside Pelican Road, and she saw him. Jack Mason was a big man. He had always been a big man, 6'3", since he was 17 years old, 260 pounds since his late 20s, and every pound of it was the kind that came from hard living rather than a gym. His forearms alone were the size of most men's calves. He had tattoos that started at his knuckles and disappeared under his collar and reappeared on the back of his neck. And the one on his throat, a grinning skull with the word iron written beneath it in block letters, had been put there on purpose, so that anyone looking at him directly would see it and understand something important about who they were dealing with. His road name was Iron. He had earned it in ways that no one talked about in polite company. He was lying face up in 2 inches of standing ditch water, and he was dying. Emily could see 3 things immediately, the way children sometimes see clearly when adults would flinch away. She could see the dark stains spreading across his chest, too dark, too fast. She could see one of his hands moving very slowly, trying to reach something at his side and failing. And she could see his eyes open, tracking still alive inside, finding her face from 6 feet away and going completely still. He looked at her. She looked at him. Nobody moved for 1 long second. Then Jack Mason opened his mouth and said in a voice that barely qualified as a voice, "Run." Emily Carter did not run. She would not be able to explain this later. Not to the police, not to her mother, not to the counselor the school sent 3 weeks afterward. She would try. She would say things like, "I didn't want to," and "he looked scared," and "I don't know, I just didn't." None of it would fully capture what happened in that moment, which was simply that a 7-year-old girl looked at a dying man and felt something so large and so certain inside her chest that running became physically impossible. She slid down the gravel slope in her red rubber boots. She got her boots wet immediately. The ditch water was cold enough to make her gasp. She knelt beside him. He was staring at her like she had lost her mind. "Little girl," he said. His voice had a rattle in it that she didn't recognize, but that turned her stomach. "You need to go home right now." "You're bleeding," Emily said. "I know I'm bleeding. A lot. I know that too." He tried to shift, and the sound he made, involuntary sharp, made Emily's hands fly out instinctively and press against his chest without any plan or instruction. He went rigid. "Don't," he said. "Then wait." She kept her hands where they were. She could feel the heat of him through his jacket. She could feel the pulse, fat irregular, terrifying. "Does that help?" she asked. He was breathing through his nose, now controlled, fighting. He looked down at her hands and then back at her face. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, that helps." His name, she would learn later, was Jack. He did not tell her his road name. He did not tell her he was the chapter president of one of the most feared motorcycle clubs on the West Coast. He did not tell her that he had been ambushed 40 minutes ago on Route 9, that two of the men who ambushed him were connected to the Mendez syndicate, or that one of the vehicles involved had a county sheriff's department parking permit on the dashboard. He told her his name was Jack and that he was going to be okay and that she should not be scared. She told him she wasn't scared. "You should be," he said. "Are you scared?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked. Then he said very quietly, "A little bit, yeah." "Then I'll stay with you," Emily said, like it was the simplest math problem in the world. "So you're not scared by yourself." Jack Mason Iron, a man who had buried 3 brothers, who had spent 11 months in a federal correctional facility and walked out unchanged, who had broken bones that healed wrong and never complained, pressed his lips together hard and looked up at the sky for a moment. "Okay," he said. His voice was different when he said it. Lower. "Okay, kid." The first mini-crisis arrived 2 minutes later when he tried to breathe deeply and couldn't. Emily felt it the way his chest lurched under her hands, trying and failing. "Jack," she said sharply, "I'm fine." "You're not fine," you made that noise again. "What noise?" "The bad noise. The one that sounds like—" She searched for words. "Like when the drain is clogged." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "That's a lung problem, kid. Don't let that scare you." "What do I do about it?" He looked at her for a long moment. He was assessing her. She realized even at 7 the way adults assess children when they're deciding how much truth they can handle. She stared back at him without blinking, and something in her expression must have answered his question. "There's a phone," he said, "inside pocket, left side." She looked at the jacket. She looked at the blood. "I have to move my hands," she said. "Just one. Use one. Fast." She worked her left hand into the inside pocket of his jacket, and her fingers closed around a phone. Small, hard, not his regular phone, she could tell somehow. A backup, a burner, something kept for emergencies. "Got it," she said. "Good girl. What do I do with it?" "There's a number in there under the name Brick. Only one contact saved. You find it." She looked at the screen. One contact. Brick. "Yes." "Call it." "Should I call 911 first?" Jack's hand came up slow, heavy, and caught her wrist. Not hard, but certain. "No," he said. "Not 911, not the police. You understand me? Nobody in a uniform, only Brick." Emily looked at him. "Why?" His jaw tightened. He stared at the sky. "Because I can't trust them right now, and I need you to trust me instead." She thought about this for exactly 3 seconds. Then she called Brick. Victor Sullivan, road name Brick, answered on the second ring with a voice like gravel in a blender. "Who is this?" Not a question, a demand. Emily took a breath. "My name is Emily. I'm 7. I found a man named Jack in a ditch on Pelican's Road, and he's bleeding very badly, and he told me to call only you and not the police." Silence. Long, heavy silence. Then, "Is he conscious?" "Yes, he's talking to me." "Put him on." "He can't hold the phone. I think he's using his hands to breathe right now." More silence, the sound of something, wind or engines, or both. "Pelican Road," Brick said. "Crescent Hollow." "Yes, sir." "Don't you move. Don't let anybody near him. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." "How old did you say you were?" 7. The longest pause of all, and God Almighty, Brick said very quietly, "and then stay on the line." She stayed on the line. Jack drifted in and out, not unconscious, but somewhere close to the edge of it, that terrible gray country between aware and gone. Emily watched his face the way she would watch a candle flame in the wind, terrified of the moment it went out. Every time his eyes started to close, she said his name. "Jack." His eyes opened. "Jack, stay with me." "I'm here." "Tell me something." He looked at her sideways. "Tell you what?" Anything, just talk. So I know you're still here. He breathed carefully, in and out, managed deliberate. You gotta die. No, my mom's allergic. Cat, one. Her name is Biscuit. Good name for a cat. She hates everyone except me. Sounds like half the guys I know. Emily almost smiled. Almost. Do you have pets? No. Beat. I travel a lot. Where do you travel? Everywhere. His voice was getting quieter. She pressed her hands harder instinctively. He grunted. Mostly up and down the coast. Sometimes inland. Nevada, Oregon. Do you like it? He thought about this with more seriousness than she expected. I did, he said. For a long time I did. The way he said did made her stomach hurt. You'll travel again, she said firmly. He looked at her. I mean it, she said. You will. Jack Mason looked at this 7-year-old girl kneeling in ditch water with her strawberry hair tie and her red rubber boots and her small hands pressed against his chest, and he said nothing for a moment. Then, you always this stubborn? My mom says yes. Your mom's right. Brick's voice came back through the phone, which Emily had propped against a rock, so she could have both hands free. Emily, you still there? Yes, sir. We're 12 minutes out. 12 minutes, you understand. You keep pressure on him. You keep him talking. And if you see headlights on that road, any headlights, you tell me immediately. What if it's the police? Then you tell me immediately and you stay exactly where you are. You don't speak to them. You don't wave them down. You don't. He said not to trust them, Emily said. A pause. Jack said that. Yes, sir. Then Jack was right. Can you do this, Emily? She looked down at her hands, at the blood, at the man beneath them who was watching her face now with an expression she didn't have the vocabulary for, yet something between awe and despair, and a gratitude so heavy it looked like grief. Yes, sir, she said. I can do this. 8 minutes passed. In those 8 minutes, 3 things happened. The first thing, Jack told her quietly and without drama, that he had been shot. Not that this was a surprise she had suspected, but hearing it said aloud made it real in a new way. 2 shots, he thought. One had gone through, one hadn't. He had driven another 6 miles after being hit before his bike went down. 6 miles. Emily did not fully understand what that meant physically, but the look on his face when he said it told her it was important. Why did someone shoot you, she asked. Because I know something I wasn't supposed to know. What do you know, Husso? He looked at her steadily. Something that's going to matter a lot, very soon. Is that why you can't call the police? Some of the police are the reason I'm in this ditch, Emily. She absorbed this, processed it. That's really bad, she said. Yeah. Are they going to come here? Probably. Before Brick gets here. He hesitated. Possibly. Emily nodded once, pressed her hands down harder. Then we better hope Brick drives fast. Jack said nothing, but his hand, the one that had been lying flat in the ditch water, moved slowly across the ground and came to rest against the side of her boot. Not grabbing, not holding, just resting there. Contact, comfort, in whatever direction it was traveling. The second thing that happened, she heard the sirens. Distant, very distant, but there. Brick, she said to the phone. I hear it, he said immediately. He had been listening the whole time. Don't move, that's not us. We don't run sirens. It's coming from the north. How far? Far, but getting closer. Jack's eyes were open and sharp now. Whatever the sound of sirens did to him, it was the opposite of sedating. He tried to push himself up, and Emily put one hand flat on his shoulder. Don't, she said. Emily, you'll start bleeding faster. Don't. He stopped, stared at her. You are something else, you know that. My mom says I'm a handful. Your mom's right about everything, sounds like. Brick, she said to the phone. How far are you? 6 minutes. The sirens were 4. The third thing, Jack reached into his jacket himself, slowly, painfully, with a sound that made her wince, and pulled out something she hadn't noticed before. Small, heavy, metal but not a weapon, a lighter. Except it wasn't just a lighter. She could see, even at 7, that the bottom had been modified somehow, a small seam almost invisible running around the base. He pressed it into her hand. Hold on to this, he said. She looked at it. What is it? Something important. More important than your phone? More important than anything on this road right now. His voice was very serious, very quiet. Don't show it to anyone in a uniform. Don't tell anyone you have it. You put it in your boot right now under your foot, and you don't take it out until someone I trust asks for it. Who do you trust? Brick. Anyone else? He thought about it. Nobody on this road, nobody with a badge. Emily looked at the lighter. She looked at him. She put it in her boot, under the arch of her foot, and laced it against her ankle with the rubber of the boot itself. Done, she said. Good girl, he said. And then softer, good girl. The sirens were close now. Not one car, two, maybe three. Brick. I know, Emily, listen to me very carefully. When those cars arrive, you stay right where you are. You keep your hands on his chest. You look scared, which you probably are. I'm not scared, she said automatically. A beat. Then right. Okay. You look calm. You say you found him and you called for help. Nothing else. You don't know who he is. You don't know anything about a phone. And you absolutely do not know anything about a lighter. Okay. Say it back. I found him. I called for help. I don't know who he is. I don't know about the phone or the lighter. Perfect. His voice had something in it she couldn't name. You're doing incredible, Emily. I need you to know that. Just get here, she said. 4 minutes. The first headlights appeared on Pelican Road. The cruiser slowed, stopped. A door opened. Footsteps on gravel, heavy official, the sound of someone with a gun and a radio, and the authority to use both. A flashlight found them. The beam swept across the ditch, across the massive tattooed man, across the blood, across the ditch water, and finally landed on a 7-year-old girl in red rubber boots, with her hands pressed flat against a dying man's chest, looking up at the light without flinching. A voicemail surprised, shaken despite itself. Jesus Christ, kid, are you? I'm okay, Emily said clearly. He's not. He's been shot. He needs an ambulance. I've been keeping pressure on the wounds. The officer came down the slope, knelt, reached for his radio, looked at Jack, at the tattoos, at the cut, at the road name stitched on the leather, and his expression changed. Not surprise. Something else. Recognition. He knew who Jack Mason was. And for just a fraction of a second, and barely visible, easily missed by an adult, his hand went to his radio and then stopped. Emily saw it. A 7-year-old girl kneeling in ditch water holding a dying man together saw a police officer recognize a face and pause before calling for help. She said nothing. She pressed her hands down harder. And under her boot, against the arch of her foot, she felt the weight of a small metal lighter and understood with a certainty that had no business living in the chest of a 7-year-old that Jack Mason had been right about everything. Brick, she said very quietly, her lips barely moving, the phone still propped against the rock near her knee. He recognized him, the officer. He recognized Jack, and he stopped. Brick's voice came back in a whisper of its own, low-controlled and absolutely certain. I'm 2 minutes out, Emily. 2 minutes. You hold that man together. She held him together. The second cruiser arrived. Then a third. Then the sound, distant but growing fast, of engines. Not car engines. Something rawer, louder. Something that vibrated in the chest before it reached the ears. Motorcycles, many of them. Coming down Pelican Road like a wave that had been building for miles. The first officer looked up from the ditch. The second officer looked up. Even Jack Mason, barely conscious, barely there, opened his eyes and turned his head toward the sound. And Emily Carter, 7 years old, covered in someone else's blood, holding a secret under her boot and a dying man together with her hands. Emily Carter almost smiled. They came, she whispered. Jack's hand found her boot again in the dark. They always come, he said. The motorcycles hit Pelican Road like thunder that had been holding its breath. There were 9 of them. Emily didn't count. She felt them before she heard them, clearly felt the vibration move up through the gravel and into her knees and into her palms that were still pressed hard against Jack's chest. The first officer snapped upright. The second one took 3 steps back toward his cruiser without meaning to. The third, the one who had paused before calling for help, the one whose expression had shifted in that almost invisible way when he recognized Jack's face, that one went completely still. Victor Sullivan came off his bike before it stopped moving. He was not a small man. He was not a gentle-looking man. He had a beard that had been growing since the Clinton administration and hands that looked like they had been carved from something that didn't exist in nature. He covered the distance from the road to the ditch in 4 strides, and when he got to the edge and looked down, he stopped. He looked at Jack, then he looked at Emily. His face did something complicated. "You're Emily," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." "You kept pressure on him this whole time." "Yes, sir." He was quiet for 1 second, just one. Then he turned his head and said in a voice that expected immediate obedience, "Dex, Torres, down here now. Bring the kit." 2 men came down the slope, fast-moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that told Emily they had done this before. Not this exact thing, but something like it in other ditches on other roads, on nights that nobody would ever write about. The first officer stepped forward. "Sir, you need to stand back. This is a police—" Brick looked at him, just looked at him. The officer stopped talking. "You called an ambulance," Brick said. Yes, it's en route." "How long?" 8 minutes approximately." "Then you have 8 minutes to stand exactly where you are and let my people stabilize him." Brick's voice never rose. It never needed to. "Unless you want to explain to your supervisor why you let a man bleed out on a public road while you cited jurisdiction." The officer opened his mouth, closed it, stepped back. Emily watched all of this with her hands still flat on Jack's chest because nobody had told her to move them yet, and she wasn't moving them until somebody she trusted did. Jack's eyes found hers. "You can let go now," he said quietly. "They've got it." She didn't let go. "Emily." "One more second," she said. "Just one more second." He didn't argue. He let her have it. Then Dex was beside her, a big man with a surprisingly careful touch, placing a thick square of gauze and pressing it firm, saying quietly, "I got him, sweetheart. You did good. I got him now." And she felt his hands take over the pressure, and she sat back on her heels and finally let her arms drop. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't noticed until now. Brick crouched beside her. Down at her level. He was enormous, even crouching, but he made himself small somehow, the way certain large people learn to do when they need to. He looked at her hands, then at her face. "You're not hurt," he said. "It's his blood, not mine." He exhaled through his nose. "Okay." He looked at her for another moment, reading something in her face that she wasn't aware she was showing. "Jack told you not to call the police." "Yes." "Did he tell you why?" She glanced at the officers standing 10 yards away, then back at Brick. She said nothing. Brick nodded slowly. "Good girl," he said. The exact same words Jack had used. "Did he give you anything?" Emily looked at him for 3 full seconds, measuring, deciding. She was 7 years old and she was measuring a man she had never met against a set of instructions given by a man she had known for less than an hour, and somehow in the strange arithmetic of that night it added up. She reached into her boot. She pulled out the lighter. Brick's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes went very, very still. He took it from her carefully, not grabbing, not snatching, just receiving it the way you receive something that has weight beyond its size. He turned it once in his hand. Then he closed his fist around it and put it in his interior jacket pocket in one smooth motion, and his eyes swept the road in the same instant, checking the officers, checking his men, confirming no one had seen the exchange. "Thank you," he said. "What is it?" Emily asked. "Something that's going to help a lot of people," Brick said, "and hurt a few of the right ones." She nodded. That was enough. Then Torres said sharply from beside Jack, "Brick, his pressure's dropping. We need the bus right now." Brick stood. His voice cut across the road. "Where is that ambulance?" The third officer, the still one, reached for his radio slowly. Too slowly. Brick's eyes went to him like a laser finding a target, and something passed between them in the dark, wordless and absolute, and the officer's hand moved faster. Emily watched the still officer's face while he talked into his radio. She kept watching it. She thought about what Jack had said. "Some of the police are the reason I'm in this ditch." She thought about the way this man had paused. She filed it away in the part of her that was still and watchful, the part that her mother called stubbornness and her teachers called intensity, and that had no proper name yet because she was 7, and the world hadn't given her the vocabulary for what she actually was, which was someone who did not miss things. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes, not 8, 4, And in those 4 minutes, the third officer made 2 phone calls that he stepped away from the group to make far enough that no one could hear, close enough that Emily, who no one was paying attention to anymore, could watch his mouth moving. She didn't know who he was calling. She knew it mattered. She looked at Brick, who was watching the paramedics load Jack onto the stretcher, and she said, "That officer made 2 phone calls." Brick didn't look at her immediately. He waited 2 beats, just 2, and then looked down casual like she'd said something about the weather. "Which one?" "The one who didn't talk much, who stood still when you came." Brick looked at the officer for exactly half a second, then back at the paramedics. "Okay," he said quietly. His voice was different now, quieter. The kind of quiet that isn't calm, the kind that is something being held very carefully under pressure. "Okay, Emily, you need to go home now." "I want to know if Jack." "He's going to St. Mary's. He's going to be in surgery. And he is going to be alive when it's done because I am personally going to make sure of that." He looked at her directly. "I will send someone to your house tomorrow with news. Someone you can trust. I'll tell you their name right now so you know. His name is Danny. He has red hair and a scar through his left eyebrow. You remember that? Red hair, scar through his left eyebrow. Danny. Good. Now I need you to go home. What's your address?" she told him. He repeated it back without writing it down. "Go home," he said. "Don't tell anyone about the lighter. Don't tell anyone what Jack said about the police. As far as you're concerned, you found a hurt man, you called 911. But I didn't call 911. I called you. I know, but from now on you called 911 first, and then you called the number on the phone because a man who was hurt told you to. That's all you know. You understand the difference." She did understand. She understood very clearly, in fact, and the clarity of it scared her more than the blood had. "Brick," she said, "yeah. Is that officer going to come to my house?" The question landed between them and stayed there for a moment. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Brick said. It was not Emily noticed a no. She went home. She walked the quarter-mile back up Pelican Road in her wet boots with blood drying on her hands and the sound of the ambulance fading in the opposite direction. And she thought about Jack's face when he said, "They always come." And she thought about the still officer's mouth moving in the dark. And she thought about a lighter that wasn't just a lighter. And by the time she pushed open the back gate of her yard, she had made herself a promise she couldn't fully articulate, but that lived in her chest like something with weight. She wasn't done with this yet. Whatever this was, she wasn't done. Her mother was still on the phone. Susan Carter turned and saw her daughter standing in the back doorway, soaking wet from the knees down, with rust-colored stains covering both hands and her forearms and the front of her jacket. And the sound she made, half word, half not, was something Emily had never heard from her before and never wanted to hear again. She said she'd found a hurt man. She said she'd stayed with him until help came. She said she was fine. What she did not say would fill a room. Susan cleaned her hands at the kitchen sink, which took longer than it should have. She asked questions in the fast, desperate way of a parent trying to build a complete picture from incomplete pieces, and Emily answered each one carefully, giving truth where truth was safe and silence where it wasn't. Her mother was crying by the time the hot water ran clear. Emily wasn't. She'd made herself a promise about that too, though she couldn't have explained exactly when or why. Susan put her to bed at 9:30 with a glass of warm milk and 3 blankets and the cat Biscuit, who sensed something was wrong and stayed on Emily's chest all night with her paws tucked under her, purring with a steadiness that felt intentional. Emily did not sleep. She lay in the dark and she replayed every second, not with fear, not with the shaky aftermath that adults might expect, but with the focused attention of someone cataloging, organizing, making sure nothing was lost. Jack's voice, the way his hand rested against her boot, the weight of the lighter, the officer's face, Brick's eyes when she handed it over. The 2 phone calls. She was still thinking about the 2 phone calls when she heard at just past midnight a car slow on the road in front of her house. It did not stop. It rolled past slowly, too slowly, and then continued on. Emily lay still. Biscuit's purring stopped. 2 minutes later, the same car came back. This time it stopped. She heard a door, footsteps on the front walk, and then nothing. No knock, no bell, just the particular silence of someone standing on the other side of a door deciding something. Then footsteps retreating. Car door. Engine. Gone. Emily breathed. She reached under her pillow where she had put the burner phone, the one she had somehow kept, without anyone noticing. Or maybe without anyone caring enough to take it back. Or maybe because Brick had let her keep it on purpose, and she looked at it in the dark. One text message. Received 11 minutes ago from the only contact in the phone. Brick. He's in surgery, going well. Danny comes tomorrow at noon. Don't open the door for anyone before then. Anyone. B. She read it twice. Then don't open the door for anyone. She thought about the car that had stopped outside. She set the phone back under her pillow. She put her hand on Biscuit, who had started purring again. Though differently, now lower, more vigilant, the purr of an animal that is listening. I know, Emily said quietly to the cat, to the dark, to herself. I know. She thought about what Brick had not said when she asked if the officer would come to her house. She thought about the way his face had moved instead of his mouth. She thought about Jack's final instruction before she'd given the phone to Brick, the part she hadn't told anyone yet, the part that came before the lighter, when Jack had looked at her with his eyes fully clear for one long moment and said, there's a name. If anything goes wrong tonight, if anyone shows up who isn't Brick, who isn't Danny, you remember a name. Raymond Cole. You say that name out loud to the right person and everything changes. You understand? She had said, yes, she had understood. Raymond Cole. She hadn't told Brick. Not because she didn't trust him, she did instinctively, in the bone-deep way that children sometimes trust people that adults would second-guess. She hadn't told him because Jack had said the right person, and she didn't know yet who that was. She was starting to think it might not be Brick. The car outside had stopped in front of her house at midnight. And at midnight, as far as the official record would later show, Detective Raymond Cole of the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department had been logged at his desk completing paperwork. Paperwork that someone had filed on his behalf. Filed retroactively. Filed by someone who knew already that it was going to be needed. Emily Carter didn't know any of this yet. She was 7 years old and she was lying in the dark with a cat on her chest and a dead man's phone under her pillow and a name in her head that felt like a lit match in a closed room. She did not know that in a surgical suite 40 minutes away, Jack Mason was fighting for his life on a table while a man in scrubs who had never met him kept stealing glances at his phone during the procedure, checking for a message, waiting for a message, and growing more and more agitated when it didn't come. She did not know that Brick had stationed 2 of his men on opposite ends of Pelican Road, and that one of them had photographed the car that had stopped in front of her house, and that the plate had come back registered to a vehicle in the county motor pool. She did not know that by morning, a man with red hair and a scar through his left eyebrow would be sitting in a parked truck 3 houses down from hers, engine off, watching both directions with the quiet patience of someone who had done this kind of watching before and understood its importance. What she knew was the name, Raymond Cole, and she knew in the still certain 7-year-old place in her chest that her mother called stubbornness and her teachers called intensity, that the night was not finished with her yet. Down the hall, Susan Carter sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. She had called the non-emergency police line and reported that her daughter had found an injured man, and that help had been rendered and everything was fine. The person on the line had taken her name and address and said an officer would follow up in the morning. Susan had said thank you and hung up and sat at the table for a long time after. She thought about the blood on Emily's hands. She thought about the way her daughter had answered questions completely calmly with the economy of someone who had decided in advance exactly how much to say. She thought about the look in her 7-year-old's eyes that had no business being there, that belonged to someone older, someone who had already learned that the world contains things that cannot be undone. She thought something happened out there that Emily is not telling me. She did not know how right she was. She did not know that 300 yards from her kitchen on Pelican Road, the tire marks where a large motorcycle had gone down were already being photographed by a man in plain clothes who was not a forensic investigator and who would not be filing his photographs with any law enforcement agency. She did not know that the man taking those photographs worked for Raymond Cole, and she did not know, could not have known, sitting at that table in her quiet kitchen in Crescent Hollow, that by this time tomorrow, every single thing she thought was safely behind her would be standing on her front porch. But Emily knew, not all of it, not the details, but the shape of it, the approaching weight of it, She felt it the way she had felt Jack's chest failing under her hands in the ditch. The recognition of something that needs stopping before it gets worse. She reached under her pillow one more time. She typed 3 words into the burner phone and sent them to the only contact. Someone came tonight. Brick's response came back in 47 seconds. I know. Sleep. Danny will be there at noon. Trust no one before noon. B. She put the phone away. She closed her eyes. Biscuit pressed closer, heavy and warm, and Emily put one hand on the cat's back and felt the purring move through her palm and up her arm. Outside, the road was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that has something in it. The kind that isn't empty, but full of things moving carefully, things holding still, things waiting for morning with more patience than morning deserves. Emily Carter waited too. She was very good at it. Danny arrived at 11:58. Emily knew it was him before her mother opened the door because she had been watching the street from her bedroom window since 7 in the morning, and she had seen the truck 3 houses down that had been there all night, and she had watched the man with red hair climb out of it at 11:45 and walk toward her house with the careful, unhurried pace of someone who had already checked every angle twice. Red hair, scar through his left eyebrow, exactly as Brick had described. She was downstairs before her mother reached the front door. Susan Carter opened it to find a man in his mid-30s with a flannel shirt and clean hands and an expression that was working very hard to be non-threatening. He said his name was Danny Reeves. He said he was a friend of Victor Sullivan. He said he was here to check on Emily. Susan looked at him for a long moment. She was not a naive woman. She had grown up in a house with a father who drank and a brother who made bad choices. And she had developed, over the years, a particular kind of radar for men who stood on her porch with soft voices and careful eyes. She was reading him now. How do you know Victor Sullivan? She said. We go back about 12 years. He called me last night, said your daughter helped a friend of his and that I should come make sure she was okay. Danny paused. And make sure you both were safe. Susan's eyes sharpened. Safe from what? Mom, Emily said from behind her. Let him in. Susan turned. She looked at her daughter standing in the hallway, 7 years old, dry clothes hair, brushed the strawberry, hair tie gone, and replaced with a plain blue one, and in her eyes that look again, the one that didn't belong to a 7-year-old but lived there anyway. She let him in. They sat at the kitchen table. Susan made coffee without asking if Danny wanted any. Danny sat across from Emily and put his hands flat on the table and said, he made it through surgery. He's out. He's going to need time, but he's going to be okay. Emily felt something release in her chest. Something she hadn't fully known was clenched. Okay, she said. He asked about you. First thing he said when he came out of anesthesia, before his name, before anything he said, the little girl. Is she okay? Danny looked at her steadily. I thought you should know that. Emily looked at the table. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in front of Danny, whom she had known for 4 minutes. She was not going to cry in front of her mother, who was already doing enough of that for both of them. I'm okay, she said. I know you are. He said it the same way Brick had said things like a statement, not a compliment. Just a fact being confirmed. But I need to talk to you about something, and I need to talk to your mom too, and it's important that you both listen to the whole thing before you say anything. Susan sat down slowly. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Danny said, the man your daughter helped last night, Jack Mason, he was ambushed. He was deliberately run off that road by people who knew his route and knew his schedule. That kind of information doesn't come from nowhere. He paused. We believe there's at least one person inside the county sheriff's department who is working with the people who ordered the ambush. Susan said, that's not something I know, Danny said. I know how that sounds. Who are these people? Susan said. What do they want? They want something Jack was carrying, something that would expose them. He looked at Emily, something that Emily handled last night. Susan's head turned slowly toward her daughter. Emily said nothing. Emily, Susan said, very quiet, very careful. What did you not tell me last night? The kitchen was absolutely still. I kept something for Jack, Emily said. He gave it to me to keep safe, and then I gave it to Brick. What was it? A lighter, but not a regular lighter. Susan put her face in both hands for a moment. Then she took them away. She looked at Danny. What was in it? Evidence digital. Enough to take down a syndicate that has been operating up and down this coast for 6 years and that has bought significant protection from certain officials. Danny's voice stayed level, clinical, like a man reading from a document he had memorized. The people behind that syndicate know that the evidence exists. They know Jack had it. They know he was alive when the ambulance took him. And they know he stopped. They know he wasn't alone, Emily said. Danny looked at her. Yes. The word landed on the table between all three of them and stayed there. Susan stood up so fast her chair scraped. Then we need to go somewhere, Danny. Mrs. Carter. His voice stopped her. The person we believe is connected to the syndicate inside the sheriff's department, we don't know yet how high it goes. We don't know who is safe to call. Until we do, the safest place for you and Emily is here, with people we trust watching the house, which we already have. You mean the man in the truck, Emily said. Danny looked at her again. Yes. There was someone last night too, Emily said. A car stopped in front of the house around midnight. It didn't knock. It just stopped and then left. Danny nodded slowly, not surprised, which itself was information. We know, we got the plate. Whose was it? He looked at her for a moment. She could see him deciding again, same calculation that Brick had made, that Jack had made, the one about how much truth a 7-year-old could hold. She stared back at him with the same expression she'd given Jack in the ditch, and he arrived at the same answer. It was registered to the county motor pool, he said. A vehicle that was checked out last night by a detective named Raymond Cole. The name hit Emily like something physical. She had not said that name out loud yet. Not to her mother, not to Brick, not to anyone. She had kept it exactly where Jack had put it, in the still, quiet center of her, like a stone at the bottom of a well. She had been waiting for the right person. She looked at Danny Reeves across the table, red hair scar through his left eyebrow, hands flat on the table, eyes direct. She said, Jack told me that name. The air in the room changed. Danny went very still. When? Before he gave me the lighter. He said if anything went wrong, if someone showed up who wasn't Brick or Danny, I should remember a name. Raymond Cole. She paused. He said if I said that name to the right person, everything would change. Danny was quiet for so long that Susan started to reach for him. Then he said very softly, Emily, did you tell Brick this? No. Why not? Because Jack said the right person, not any person. I didn't know yet if Brick was the right one. Danny looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, not quite emotion, not quite calculation, something in between. And now, he said, now I know it's you, Emily said, because you said his name first. I didn't say it, you said it, which means you already know who he is and what he did. Danny put both hands over his face, pressed them there for 3 full seconds, then took them away. God, he said quietly, you're 7 years old. Almost 8, Emily said. He almost laughed. It came out wrong through the nose, sudden, like something that escaped before he could stop it. Then he straightened and his face went serious again, and he said, Raymond Cole is the 3rd officer who arrived on scene last night. He's a detective, 12-year veteran, commendations on his record, known as someone who gets results. He said the last part with a flatness that made the words mean their opposite. He has been on the Mendez Syndicate's payroll for at least 3 years. We believe it was Cole who gave them Jack's route, Cole who coordinated the ambush, and Cole who drove past this house at midnight to confirm what the little girl who was at the scene looked like. The coffee mug in Susan Carter's hand cracked. Not broke, cracked, a thin line up one side where she had gripped it too hard. She set it down very carefully. He was looking at my daughter, she said. He was assessing whether she was a threat, Danny said. And here's what you need to understand, what Emily understood last night, I think, without anyone telling her. He looked at Emily. The lighter is with Brick now. The evidence is secure. Cole doesn't know that. He thinks it's still possible that a 7-year-old girl is carrying the one thing that can destroy everything he's built. So he'll come back, Susan said. Yes, Danny said. He'll come back. It was 11 minutes past noon. At 11 minutes past noon on a Tuesday in October in a coastal town in Northern California, a woman and her 7-year-old daughter sat at a kitchen table with a man they had known for less than 20 minutes. And the three of them looked at each other across the specific silence of people who understand that something is coming and have to decide right now what they're going to do about it. Susan said, "What do we do?" Danny said, "We wait for Brick to move first. He has the evidence. He's already been in contact with a federal contact, someone outside the county, outside the state chain, someone Cole can't reach. Once that transfer happens, Cole has no reason to come here." "How long?" Susan said. 24 hours, maybe less. "And until then, my guys don't leave. You don't open the door for anyone you don't recognize. You don't call the sheriff's department for any reason." Susan nodded. "Then, what if Cole comes before 24 hours? Danny was quiet. "Danny," Susan said. "Then Brick comes," Danny said. "And it won't be a conversation." Susan looked at her daughter. Emily looked back at her. Something passed between them. The specific communication of a mother and child who know each other's silences, and then Susan looked back at Danny and said, "Okay." Emily said nothing. She was thinking about Raymond Cole's face in the dark on Pelican Road, the way he had gone still when he recognized Jack, the way his hand had paused before the radio. She was building him in her mind the way you build something you need to understand before it reaches you. She had seen his face. She had seen what his face did when he thought no one was watching. She had been watching. She thought he doesn't know that. She thought that matters. She said, "Danny, does Cole know I told Jack something, or said something, or did something he doesn't know about?" Danny frowned. "What do you mean? Does he think I'm just a little girl who happened to be there, or does he think I know things?" Danny considered this carefully. "We believe he thinks you're a witness, a liability because of what you saw, not because of what you know." "Good," Emily said. Susan looked at her. "Emily, that's good," Emily repeated. "If he thinks I'm just a witness, he wants to silence. That's different from him thinking I have information that matters. One of those is about getting rid of a problem. The other is about getting something back." The kitchen was quiet. Danny Reeves looked at a 7-year-old girl and made no attempt to hide what was on his face, which was something between deep respect and a very specific kind of sorrow for all the things she was going to understand too early. "You're right," he said. "That is different." "So we don't tell him I know his name," Emily said. "If he comes, we don't tell him Jack told me about him. We let him think I'm just a scared little girl who found a man in a ditch." "Emily," Susan said sharply, "nobody is using you as a mom." Emily's voice was steady. "I'm not being used. I'm choosing." The distinction landed hard. Susan opened her mouth, closed it, and pressed her lips together so firmly they went white. "She's right," Danny said quietly to Susan. "She's not wrong about any of it." Susan looked at him with an expression that could have stripped paint. "She is 7 years old, Mr. Reeves." "I know," Danny said. "Nayum." He said it the way people say things that are true, but not sufficient. The afternoon passed the way afternoons pass when you are waiting for something you cannot name precisely. Danny stayed. He made phone calls in the backyard out of earshot with his back to the house. He came back in and said little. He ate half a sandwich Susan made without tasting it. He checked his phone every 4 minutes, not bothering to hide it. Emily did her homework at the kitchen table. Long division. She got through 3 problems and then stopped and sat looking at the numbers without seeing them. She was thinking about Jack on the operating table. She was thinking about what he had said, "I know something I wasn't supposed to know," and she was thinking about what it cost to know things that other people wanted to stay buried. She was thinking that she was now one of those people. She knew Raymond Cole's name. She knew what he was. She knew what the lighter had contained before it passed through her hands. She was 7 years old and she was inside something very large, and she could feel its edges but not its full shape, and the not knowing the shape of it was the hardest part. At 4:17 in the afternoon, Danny's phone rang. He picked up immediately, listened, said 3 words, "How far out?" and then ended the call and stood up. "Problem," he said. Susan stood. "What kind?" "Cole filed paperwork this morning, a warrant request for a witness interview." He looked at Emily. "You." He filed it as a follow-up to last night's incident. Routine on paper. A detective wanting to interview a child witness about a shooting. "He can't just," Susan started. "It's legal," Danny said. "On paper, it's completely routine. He can show up here with that warrant request and you're obligated to allow an interview. I don't have to let him in my house." "No, but if you refuse, he escalates. And if he escalates, it creates a paper trail that brings more people to this door, some of whom we can't vet, and it makes you look uncooperative in an official investigation. His jaw was tight. He's smart. He knew exactly what he was doing when he filed it. "When is he coming?" Emily said. "Warrant request was filed at 9 this morning. Standard processing gives him clearance around." Danny checked his watch. Now, roughly now. The front doorbell rang. Nobody moved for one full second. Then Susan's hand went to Emily's shoulder. Emily stood up from the table without being told. Danny was already at the kitchen doorway. "Don't open it yet," he said. "He rang the bell," Susan said. "Danny." "I know. Give me 30 seconds. He had his phone in his hand, typing fast. Then he looked up. "Brick is 15 minutes out. I need 15 minutes. "He has a warrant request," Susan said. "I can't leave him standing on the porch for 15 hours." The bell rang again, then a knock, 3 of them. Official. The knock of someone who does this professionally and knows that the sound of it alone changes the air in a house. Then a voice muffled through the door. "Mrs. Carter, Detective Raymond Cole, Humboldt County Sheriff's Department. I called ahead this morning. I just need a few minutes of your time." Emily heard his voice. She had not heard him speak on Pelican Road. She had only seen his face. Now she heard his voice, moderate, professional, the voice of a man who had practiced being reasonable until it became indistinguishable from actually being so, and something in the pit of her stomach went cold and settled. This was him. Raymond Cole was on the other side of her front door. "Mom," Emily said very quietly, "answer it. Let him think everything is normal." "Absolutely not." 15 minutes, Emily said. "Danny needs 15 minutes. We give him that by acting like we have nothing to hide. If we leave him on the porch, he knows." She looked at her mother with those eyes that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. "He's already suspicious. We can't give him more." Danny looked at Emily, then at Susan. He said nothing. The decision wasn't his to make, and he knew it. Susan Carter stood in her kitchen and looked at her daughter for a very long moment. She thought about all the things she had tried to protect Emily from, the ugly things, the complicated things, the things that had no clean resolution. She thought about how her daughter had spent last night in a ditch on Pelican Road keeping a dying man alive with her bare hands, and how she had come home and answered questions carefully and slept or not slept with blood under her nails that the soap hadn't fully reached. She thought, "I cannot protect her from this. It's already inside the house." She walked to the front door. She opened it. Raymond Cole was exactly what his voice had promised. Late 40s, solid, a face that was neither warm nor cold, but something navigational, built for reading rooms and adjusting accordingly. He had his badge out and a manila folder in one hand and a look of practiced patience that Emily, standing in the hallway 6 feet behind her mother, studied the way you study something that might be about to bite. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "thank you for answering. I know this is difficult timing." "It's fine," Susan said. Her voice was level. Whatever she was feeling, it wasn't in her voice. Emily felt a rush of something, love maybe, or recognition, seeing in her mother a version of the same stillness she carried herself. "I just need a brief conversation with your daughter about what she witnessed last night." He looked past Susan, found Emily. And here was the thing Emily had been waiting for, the thing she had prepared herself to watch for. He looked at her, and in the first half second before his face arranged itself correctly, she saw it. Not recognition, not warmth, not the softening that adults usually showed when they looked at a 7-year-old. Calculation. He was measuring her, figuring out exactly what she was and exactly what she cost. Emily looked back at him with wide, clear, slightly frightened eyes and said nothing. Let him think she was scared. Let him think she was just a little girl. "Of course," Susan said. "Come in." He came in. Susan sat on the couch. Cole sat in the armchair across from it, the father's chair Emily had always called it privately, the chair that had been empty for 2 years. Emily sat beside her mother with her hands in her lap and her boots on the floor, and underneath one boot, nothing. The lighter was gone, had been gone since last night. But she put her foot down carefully anyway, the way you step on ground that you know is safe but check regardless. Cole opened his folder. He had a notepad, a pen, everything correct, everything official. "Emily," he said. His voice was gentle, professionally gentle. "I want to start by saying you were incredibly brave last night. What you did staying with that man, keeping pressure on his wounds, that's not something most adults would do. You should be proud." Emily said nothing. She pressed her lips together and looked at her lap. Shy, overwhelmed. A child receiving a compliment she didn't know how to handle. Cole nodded sympathetically. It's okay. You don't have to say anything. I'm just going to ask you a few simple questions and you just tell me what you remember. Okay. She nodded. Good girl. He clicked his pen. Can you tell me what time you found Mr. Mason? She told him. Accurate. No reason to lie about this. And when you found him, was he conscious? Yes. Did he say anything to you? Pause. The right length of pause for a child trying to remember. He told me to go home. Did you go home? No, I stayed. Why did you stay? She looked up at him, let her eyes be a little wet, not forced, just allowed. Because he was scared, she said, and I didn't want him to be alone. Something moved across Cole's face. He hadn't expected that. He had expected something simpler, a child reciting facts nervous and easily led. He got instead a child who was present, specific, emotionally coherent, and watching him back. He adjusted. That was very kind, he said. Emily, did Mr. Mason give you anything or ask you to carry anything for him? And there it was. The whole reason he had filed the warrant. The whole reason he was sitting in her living room with his pen and his folder and his careful voice. All of it, the badge, the notepad, the sympathetic nods, all of it had been moving toward this single question. Emily frowned. Not big, just a child's frown, the slight pulling together of brows that meant confusion or trying to remember. Give me anything, she said. Yes, anything at all. An object maybe, something small. He was bleeding really bad, Emily said. I was just trying to keep my hands on him. I understand, but sometimes in emergency situations, people pass things to bystanders for safekeeping, even without explaining why. Did anything like that happen? Emily looked at her mother. The way a child looks at a parent when a grown-up is asking something confusing and she wants permission to say she doesn't understand. Susan put her arm around Emily's shoulders. She said, Detective, I think Emily was pretty focused on keeping him alive. She's told me everything about last night, and I don't think she's holding anything back. A pause. Is this about evidence in a criminal case? Because if it is, I think we should have an attorney present before... No, Cole said smoothly. Nothing like that. This is purely routine. I'm just trying to build a complete picture of what happened. He smiled. The smile was correct. Emily hated it. Emily, did anyone else come to the scene while you were there, before the police arrived? The ambulance came. Before the ambulance. There were police cars, she said. Before the police cars. She looked at him again. The question was a test. He knew the motorcycles had come. He knew the Hells Angels had shown up. He was seeing if she would lie. Some motorcycles came, she said. They were very loud. Did you talk to any of them? They were checking on Jack. She pulled at a thread on her sleeve, nervous, childlike. They were upset. Did any of them give you anything or ask you to keep something for them? No. Cole looked at her. She looked back frightened, overwhelmed by a long night and a strange man with a badge asking questions she didn't understand. She had never worked this hard at anything in her life. Not school, not long division, not keeping a dying man alive in a drainage ditch. She was working harder right now than she had ever worked, and the effort was invisible. And that invisibility was the entire point. Cole clicked his pen again, closed his notepad. Okay, he said. That's very helpful, Emily. You've been very helpful. He stood. He started to put his folder under his arm, and then he stopped. It was so quick, so casual that Susan might not have caught it. But Emily saw it the same way she had seen his face on Pelican Road, the same way she had seen his expression when he recognized Jack. The pause, the recalibration, the pivot to something he had been saving. He reached into the folder and pulled out a card. A plain business card, his name, a phone number. He handed it to Susan. If Emily remembers anything at all, she might have left out. You call that number. Anytime, day or night. He looked at Emily over her mother's shoulder, the professional smile, the navigational face. Even something that seems small, Emily. Sometimes the smallest things are the most important. He left. Susan closed the door. She leaned against it. Danny appeared from the kitchen doorway. He had been there the entire time, silent, back flat against the wall, just inside the kitchen, listening to every word. He had his phone in his hand. He was already typing. 8 minutes, he said without looking up. You bought us 8 minutes. Brick is 7 out. Susan made a sound that was not a word. Emily stood in the middle of the hallway and looked at the closed front door and thought about the way Cole had handed over the card, the way he'd said day or night, the way his eyes had gone to her one last time over her mother's shoulder. He didn't believe her. He didn't fully believe her, and she knew it, and he knew that she knew, or he would soon if he thought about it long enough. If he played back the interview the way she was playing it back right now, she had one advantage. One. And it was rapidly expiring. Danny, she said, yeah. He's going to figure out I wasn't telling him everything. Danny looked up from his phone. Saw him. Why do you say that? Because I look too normal. A real scared little kid wouldn't be that clean. She searched for the right word. He's good at reading people. He's going to go sit in his car, and he's going to play it back, and he's going to think she was too calm, too exact. She looked at Danny. How long do we have before he comes back? Danny looked at her for a long moment. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Brick just pulled onto your street, he said. And then we have less time than I thought. He said it the way people say things when they already know what the next sentence is going to cost. Cole didn't go to his car, Danny said slowly, reading his phone screen. My man outside says Cole walked to the end of the block, made a call, and turned around. The doorbell rang. Susan spun. Danny was already moving toward the door with his hand inside his jacket. Emily stood in the center of the hall and watched the door and thought with the terrifying clarity that had been her companion since last night, he figured it out faster than I thought. And behind her outside, growing closer, she could hear it, the sound she had first felt through the gravel of Pelican Road, through her knees and her palms. The sound of engines, raw, loud, unapologetic. Coming down her street, coming fast. Raymond Cole rang the bell a second time, and Victor Sullivan's bike hit the curb outside. The bell rang a third time. Danny had his hand inside his jacket and his back against the wall beside the door. Not hiding, not crouching, just positioned. The way a man positions himself when he is ready for a door to open and doesn't know exactly what will be on the other side of it. He looked at Susan. Susan looked at the door. Emily looked at both of them and then walked forward and stood directly in front of the entrance, and Susan's arms shot out to stop her. Emily. He rang 3 times, Emily said. If we don't answer, he knows something is wrong. He has a badge. He has a reason to be here that looks legal. We answer it. She looked at her mother. But this time we do it differently. How? Susan said. You let me talk first. Absolutely not. The engines outside were louder now, close. Not just Brick, she could hear more than one could feel the vibration that had become strangely familiar, the frequency of a particular kind of arrival. Through the front window, she could see a shape she recognized, Brick's bulk, his jacket moving up the front walk fast. And behind him, 2 others. Cole was on the porch. Brick was 30 feet behind him. The math was brutal. If Susan opened the door and Cole stepped inside before Brick reached the porch, this became something else entirely. A situation inside a private home with a law enforcement officer already through the threshold and Danny with his hand inside his jacket and whatever Cole had decided to do when he turned around at the end of the block and came back. But if they waited another 15 seconds, Brick would be on the porch and Cole would see him, and then it was a different conversation altogether. Emily counted 1, 2, 3. Cole knocked again. Hard this time. Official. Mrs. Carter, I apologize for the interruption. I just have one follow-up. It won't take a minute. 4, 5. Danny had seen it too. He was watching the window with the focused stillness of a man running numbers in his head and not loving the results. 6, 7. Cole's voice again, quieter, less performance in it. I know you're home, Mrs. Carter. 8. Brick's boots hit the porch steps. 9. Cole heard them. She knew he heard them because she heard the change, the shift in his breathing, the subtle adjustment of his weight that made the porch boards creak differently. A man who had spent 12 years in law enforcement, registering a presence behind him and processing what it meant. 10. Susan opened the door. Cole was standing on the porch with his hand raised to knock again, and Brick Sullivan was 4 feet behind him on the top porch step, and the 2 men were looking at each other with the specific intensity of people who have been in the same room before and remember exactly how it ended. Cole recovered first. He was good at recovering. He turned back to Susan with barely a breath of a pause, as if Brick were furniture, as if 9 motorcycles parked on a residential street were completely ordinary. "Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry again for Detective Cole." Brick's voice was even, enormous. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because the mass behind it did all the necessary work. "You finished your interview." Cole turned, slowly, the turn of a man who chooses when to acknowledge things and has made his choice. "Mr. Sullivan, this is a police matter. I'd appreciate—" "I'm sure you would." Brick stepped up onto the porch. Not aggressive, just present, the way a wall is present. "You filed a witness interview request this morning for a 7-year-old child. Standard procedure in—" "A 7-year-old child," Brick repeated, "whose name you had because you were on scene last night." He paused, one beat, deliberate. "Funny thing about that, you were on Pelican Road within 14 minutes of the incident. 14 minutes is fast for a detective who was supposed to be on the other side of the county at the time." Something moved through Cole's face. Fast, controlled. Gone before it fully arrived. "My positioning is logged with dispatch." "I know," Brick said. "I know it's logged. I'm real curious about that log." He tilted his head slightly. "Almost as curious as I am about who you called when you left this house 20 minutes ago." The porch went absolutely silent. Emily, standing in the doorway behind her mother, watched Raymond Cole's face make a decision. She could see it happening, the pivot, the calculation, the weighing of what he had against what he had walked into, and she held her breath without meaning to. Cole said, "I don't know what you think you know about me, Sullivan, but I am a law enforcement officer in the middle of an active—" "Jack Mason is alive," Brick said. Cole stopped. "He came out of surgery this morning. He's alert. He's talking." Brick's voice was still even, still enormous, and the first thing he did when he could hold a pen was write down a name. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Emily had ever heard. Cole's hand was at his side. She could see it, the fingers, the stillness of them, the visible effort of keeping them still. "This conversation is over," Cole said. "I'm going to need you to step back." "Your name, Cole," Brick said quietly. He wrote down your name. Cole moved, not toward Brick, not toward the door, sideways one step to his left, which put him at an angle to both Brick and the open doorway, and his right hand was no longer still. It was moving toward his side, toward the holster that Emily hadn't noticed before, but noticed now with a clarity that compressed the air in her lungs. Danny came through the door. He came through it fast and quiet and placed himself directly in front of Emily and Susan, and his own hand was no longer inside his jacket, and there was a single instant where 4 people on a porch in a residential neighborhood in Northern California held completely still in a configuration that had no name in polite language, but that everyone present recognized for exactly what it was: a standoff. Gun partially drawn in response. 2 large men and a detective who had just made a decision he couldn't unmake, all balanced on a porch above a front yard where motorcycles cooled in the October air. Susan made a sound. "Don't," Emily said very quietly to her mother. Not a command, almost a request. "Don't react. Don't move. Don't change the temperature of this." Susan went still. Brick looked at Cole's hand. Cole looked at Brick's. Nobody spoke for 5 seconds that lasted considerably longer. Then Brick said, and his voice had changed, all the evenness burned away, and something older and more fundamental in its place. "If you touch that gun, Raymond, you are not leaving this porch." Cole's hand stopped. He looked at Brick. He looked at Danny. He looked at the yard behind him, where 2 of Brick's men had gotten off their bikes and were now standing at the base of the porch steps with their arms at their sides and their faces arranged in expressions that communicated their willingness to remain exactly where they were for as long as necessary. Cole was good at calculation. He had built 12 years on calculation. And the calculation he was running right now on this porch in front of these people was arriving at an answer he did not like. He moved his hand away from the holster. Brick breathed once deeply through his nose. "Good," he said. Cole straightened his jacket. His face went back to navigational reading, the room adjusting. The professional mask. Emily hated it more now than she had the first time. "This isn't over," he said, quiet, direct. "Whatever you think you have, we have everything," Brick said. "The drive, Jack's testimony, Your positioning logs cross-referenced with Mendez syndicate communication intercepts that a federal contact received this morning. He paused. This morning, Raymond. Before you filed your warrant request. Before you came here. Before you walked up this porch the second time. Another pause. You walked into this not knowing it was already done. The color left Cole's face. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone who didn't know what to watch for would have noticed. Just a subtle draining, the specific pallor of a man realizing that the ground he thought was solid has been gone for some time and he simply hadn't looked down. You're bluffing, Cole said. Call it? Brick said. Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked for the first time since arriving, truly looked, not assessed, not calculated, at Emily. She looked back at him. She did not look frightened. She did not look triumphant. She looked the same way she had looked in the ditch on Pelican Road, steady, present, watching, holding something together with the force of her attention alone. Cole said nothing. He stepped off the porch. He walked down the front path with the measured pace of someone refusing to show that every step is costing them something enormous. He opened his car door. He sat down. He started the engine. He drove away. Nobody on the porch moved until he turned the corner and disappeared. Then Susan Carter sat down on the porch step because her legs had made a unilateral decision to stop holding her up, and she put her face in both hands, and she made the sound she had been keeping behind her teeth for the past 4 minutes, which was not a scream and not a sob, but it's something between them that had no clean name. Brick sat down beside her. This large, bearded, leather-jacketed man sat on the porch step next to a woman he had known for less than 24 hours and said nothing. He just sat, present and solid, the way certain people know how to be when words would be a lesser offering than their physical weight in the world. Emily sat on her mother's other side. She took her mother's hand. Susan gripped it hard, too hard. Emily didn't say anything about it. After a while, Brick said, "It's going to be okay." Susan took her hands from her face. Her eyes were red. Is it actually going to be okay? Because yesterday morning, my biggest problem was a billing error with the electric company, and now She stopped. Started again. How is that man going to be held accountable? He has a badge. He has a log that says he was somewhere else. He had, Brick said, past tense. He had all of that before this morning. He pulled his phone from his pocket, turned it to show Susan the screen, a text thread long from a contact labeled only with initials MV. Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Vance, FBI Field Office in Sacramento. He's had the contents of that drive since 6:30 this morning. He's had Jack's signed statement since 9. The positioning logs, the call records, the financial transfers, it's been building since last night. He put the phone away. Cole is already done. He just doesn't have the paperwork yet. Susan stared at him. Then why did you let him come here? Why didn't you? Because if we moved on him before he came here, he'd know how much we had. This way, Brick looked at the empty street where Cole's car had been. This way, he went back to his people and told them what he saw. And what he was a little girl and her mother and some bikers on a porch. He doesn't know about Vance. He doesn't know the transfer already happened. He paused. He's about to make phone calls that are going to sink him and everyone above him in that organization. And every one of those calls is being recorded right now. Susan was quiet for a long time. Then, you use this house as a trap. Brick met her eyes. He didn't look away. Yes, he said, and I'm sorry for that. I genuinely am. But you do it again. He was quiet for a moment. To protect Jack's life and make sure Cole couldn't disappear into the system and resurface somewhere else, yeah, I would. He held her gaze. That doesn't make it okay. I know that. Susan looked at him for a long time with an expression that was doing several things at once, anger and relief and grief and something else, something that might have been the exhausted recognition of a person who understands that the world operates in a register somewhat darker and more complicated than they had previously allowed themselves to fully believe. She looked at Emily. Emily was sitting with her hands in her lap, her back straight, watching the corner where Cole's car had turned. She had said almost nothing since Danny came through the door. She had simply been there present, still taking in every word of everything that had passed between Brick and Susan with the absolute focused attention of someone who is not missing a single syllable. Susan said softly. Emily turned. Are you okay? Emily thought about this with genuine seriousness. She gave it the consideration it deserved, which was more than most people gave the question when it was asked of them. Then she said, "I'm tired." It was so simple, so purely true, that Susan pulled her in and held her hard. And this time Emily let herself be held without calculating anything, without watching anything, without managing anything. She was 7 years old and she was tired, and she had been holding things together since yesterday morning, and for the space of 30 seconds on a porch in October, she let someone else hold them instead. Brick stood, gave them space, walked to the edge of the porch where Danny was standing with his phone to his ear, listening to something nodding at intervals. Danny lowered the phone. "Vance is moving," he said quietly. "Arrest warrants been issued. Cole won't make it home." Brick exhaled, long, slow, controlled the exhale of a man releasing something he has been carrying at pressure for a very long time. The others, 3 names on the warrant. Cole, a sergeant named Fuentes, who ran dispatch that night and delayed the ambulance call, and a man named Gerald Okafor, who works in evidence management. Danny paused. Okafor had access to Jack's impound record from 6 months ago. That's how they knew the route. Brick's jaw tightened. Someone inside that long. At least that long. Danny pocketed his phone. Vance thinks there are 2 more above Okafor, but he doesn't have the chain complete yet. The drive should fill the gaps. Jack's gonna want to know. He already does. He's been texting me since 10 this morning. Danny almost smiled. First coherent sentence out of surgery was about the girl. Second was asking whether Vance got the files. Brick looked at Emily, who was still in her mother's arms on the porch step. Something crossed his face, private complex, the expression of a man recalibrating what he thought he understood about the world and finding that the revision is both humbling and necessary. "She bought us the time we needed," he said, "last night and today. Without her," he stopped. "Without her, Jack doesn't make it through the night," Danny said. "The drive disappears. Cole buries the incident report, and 2 witnesses develop convenient memory loss." He paused. "That's not an exaggeration." "No," Brick said. "It's not." Inside the house, Susan's phone rang. She answered it on the porch, reluctantly releasing Emily, who stayed where she was without moving away. Susan listened, said yes twice, said "oh God" once, said "thank you," and lowered the phone with both hands and looked at Brick. "That was St. Mary's," she said. "Jack is asking to see Emily." The silence on the porch had a different quality now. Something that had been held tight all night and all morning had shifted, not resolved, not finished, but moved from one state to another the way weather moves. Emily looked up. "Can I?" she said. Susan looked at Brick. Brick looked at Susan. Something passed between 2 adults who had been forced by extraordinary circumstances into a relationship with no existing template, and who were navigating it with varying degrees of grace. Susan said, "We'll go tonight, if," she looked at Brick, "if you tell me it's safe." "I'll have 2 men at the hospital," Brick said, "and Vance's people are already running perimeter. Cole's associates aren't going to try anything in a hospital with federal agents walking the halls." He paused. "It's safe. Tonight is safe." Susan nodded once. Emily looked back at the corner where Cole's car had turned. She thought about what Brick had said. He's about to make phone calls that are going to sink him. She thought about Cole's face when Brick said Jack had written down his name. She thought about the color leaving his face, the way something leaves a room not gone, but moved to somewhere less visible. She thought it's not over yet, not entirely. There are 2 more names Vance doesn't have. There are pieces of the chain still incomplete. She thought Jack knows those pieces. That's why they wanted him dead. She thought now that he's alive, he's going to tell. "Brick," she said. He looked down at her. "The other 2 people, above Okafor, the ones Agent Vance doesn't have yet." Brick went very still. "Jack knows who they are," Emily said. "That's why the drive wasn't enough. They needed to kill him before he could testify." Brick said nothing. "He's going to testify," Emily said. "Wouldn't he? That's the part that's still dangerous." Danny made a sound that was not quite a word. Brick crouched down to her level again, the same thing he had done on Pelican Road, making himself small in that way of his. He looked at her with an expression that was past the calculating stage, now past the assessing stage. Just direct, just honest. "Yes," he said, "that's the part that is still dangerous." "How long until it's not?" "When Vance has the full chain and it's in federal record." Once it's documented and distributed to multiple offices, it can't be buried. At that point, there's no value in hurting Jack because the information is already out. He paused. We think Jack can give Vance the 2 remaining names tonight, which means by tomorrow morning. It's done, Emily said. It's done. She thought about this. She thought about Jack in a hospital room 24 hours out of surgery with federal agents in the corridor and a man named Brick Sullivan who would personally dismantle anyone who came through the wrong door. She thought about a lighter that wasn't a lighter and how it had sat under her boot for less than an hour last night, and in that less than an hour had traveled from a drainage ditch in Crescent Hollow to a federal office in Sacramento. She thought about how none of it, not the drive reaching Brick, not Brick reaching Vance, not Cole, exposing himself on a porch on a Tuesday afternoon, none of it would have happened if she had run. Jack had told her to run. She had said no. She wondered if he knew that was the real reason they were all still here. Brick watched her face move through whatever it was moving through, and he waited the way people wait, who understand that some thoughts need the space to complete themselves. And when she looked up at him again, he said, "You ready to go see him tonight?" Emily said, "Yes." She said it the same way she had said everything since the ditch on Pelican Road, without hesitation, without performance, with the clean certainty of someone who has decided something and is done deciding it. But for the first time since yesterday morning, something in her exhaled too. Not relief, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first movement toward the place where things that have been terrible start to become things that happen real and true and carried but no longer arriving. Already here. Already past. Danny's phone buzzed. He read it, looked at Pruitt. Cole pulled over by federal agents 12 minutes from his house, he said. Vance says clean arrest, no incident. Brick stood. He looked at the street where the motorcycles were cooling in the October afternoon. He looked at his men at Dex and Torres and the others men who had ridden through the dark last night because one of their own was in a ditch and a child's voice on a phone had told them where to come. He looked at Susan Carter, who was sitting with her elbows on her knees and her face composed, now recomposed, the version of herself she maintained, for her daughter's sake, reassembled with visible effort and genuine love. He looked at Emily. He said, "Jack was right about you." "He didn't know me," Emily said. "No," Brick said, "but he knew what you did, and that's the same thing with the right people." Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the corner again, then at her boots, then at the house behind her house, her mother's house, Biscuit's house, the electric bill that still needed fixing, the fence post her father had never repaired. Everything the same as yesterday, everything completely different. "Okay," she said quietly. She stood up. She brushed off her jeans. She looked at her mother. "Can we have lunch? I didn't eat breakfast." Susan made a sound that was definitely a laugh, though it arrived through tears and came out sideways. She stood and put her arm around her daughter's shoulders and said, "Yeah, baby, we can have lunch." They went inside. The door closed. Brick stood on the porch for a moment longer, alone with the afternoon and the cooling engines and the residue of everything that had happened and everything that was still in motion, the federal case building in Sacramento, Jack Mason in a hospital room composing himself for one more fight, Raymond Cole sitting in the back of a federal vehicle running the same calculation he'd been running all morning, and finally arriving at the place where the numbers didn't work anymore. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and felt a lighter. The thing that had passed through a child's hands last night and carried the weight of a syndicate's secrets and cost Jack Mason 2 bullets in almost his life. He thought about her, 7 years old, red boots, hands flat on a dying man's chest. "I won't leave you." He had been doing this for 22 years. He had known men and women of genuine courage, people who had made choices under pressure that most people would not and could not make. He had respected them. He had stood beside them. He had buried some of them. He had never in 22 years met anyone quite like Emily Carter. He walked down the porch steps. Danny was waiting by the bikes. "Hospital at 6, Danny said. "Hospital at 6, Brick said. "And tell Jack to rest up. He's going to have company." They arrived at St. Mary's at 6:12. Brick had not exaggerated about the security. There were 2 of his men in the lobby, not obviously, not in a way that announced itself, but Emily noticed them the way she had noticed things all her life, with the quiet lateral attention of someone whose eyes are always doing 2 jobs at once. She noticed the man near the elevator who was reading a magazine upside down. She noticed the one by the vending machine who hadn't bought anything in the 20 minutes they had been in the building. She noticed the federal agent outside Jack's room, plain clothes but with the particular posture of someone whose job had structured their body into a specific shape. And she felt for the first time in 30 hours the specific relief of being in a place where the protection was real and layered and not dependent on her. She hadn't realized until that moment how much of the last 30 hours she had spent being the protection. Susan had her hand on Emily's shoulder. Danny walked ahead. Brick was already at the room door saying something quiet to the federal agent who nodded and stepped aside. The door opened. Jack Mason looked like a man who had been in a war and recently returned from it, which was Emily supposed exactly what he was. He was propped against pillows elevated with an IV in his left arm and a monitor attached to his chest and a bruising along his jaw that she hadn't seen in the dark last night because there had been too many other things to see. He was pale. He was thinner looking somehow in the way that hospital beds make everyone look reduced, like the overhead light was designed to take something away. But his eyes were the same. When the door opened and he saw her, his eyes were completely, absolutely the same, that same quality she had noticed in the ditch when he was dying. And she was the only thing in his field of vision. The way they went very still when they found her face, the way they did something that had no clean name, but that she recognized the same way she recognized the sound of her mother's footsteps. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "You're taller than I thought." Emily looked at him for a moment. "You're bigger than I thought," she said. "In the ditch, you were mostly horizontal." Something that had been held carefully in his face let go all at once, and he laughed short immediately. Painful, one hand going to his ribs, and then he said, "Don't make me do that. It hurts." "Then don't say funny things," Emily said. He looked at her mother, who was standing in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. Not to stop something from coming out, Emily thought, but to hold something in something tender and enormous and not fully writable. He looked at Brick, he looked at Danny, and then he looked back at Emily and said more quietly, "Come here." She walked to the chair beside his bed and sat in it. Close, she could see the monitor. She could see his numbers. She didn't fully understand them, but she could see the rhythm of the line, the steady punctuation of it, and the steadiness was the most beautiful thing she had seen in 30 hours. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Are you getting there?" He shifted slightly and didn't hide the wince well enough. "Brick tells me you handled Cole." "Brick handled Cole and Danny. You talked to him," Jack said. "Alone in your house. You sat across from him and you gave him nothing and you gave us time." "I was scared," she said, because it was true, and because he had told her in the ditch that he was scared too, and because they had an agreement, she thought about honesty in hard situations. "I know," he said. "You did it anyway." She looked at his hand on the blanket. She was thinking about the ditch, about the moment his hand had come to rest against her boot in the dark water, not grabbing just there. Contact. She reached over and put her hand on top of his, not grabbing either, just there. He looked down at her hand. He looked up at the ceiling. His jaw moved. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said, "last night, into the ditch." Susan by the door went still. Brick and Danny both found sudden interest in separate corners of the room. "Okay," Emily said. "When I first saw you when you came down that slope, I thought I was hallucinating." He said it slowly, choosing words with the care of a man who doesn't use them easily and knows it. "I thought I was that far gone." "I know, that's what I mean." He turned his hand over under hers so they were palm to palm. His hand was enormous. Hers disappeared inside it. "My whole life, I have been around people who calculated everything. Every move, every risk, every angle. People who would step over you if the math worked out that way." His voice was getting quieter, not weaker, more concentrated. "And there you were, 7 years old, doing the one thing nobody calculates, just being there, because someone needed you to be." Emily said nothing. "You didn't know me," he said. "No," she agreed. "I could have been anyone." "You were someone who was scared and alone," she said. "That's enough." The monitor beeped steadily. The IV dripped. Outside in the hallway, the federal agent shifted his weight. Jack Mason held a 7-year-old girl's hand in his, and for a while nobody in the room said anything, and the silence was not empty. Then Danny's phone buzzed. He looked at it, looked at Brick. Something passed between them, fast, significant. Brick said, "Jack, Vance is ready." Jack's expression shifted, the softness that had been in it, real unguarded belonging to the man underneath the road name, and the jacket and the 12 years of choices pulled back slightly, making room for something else. The man who had driven 6 miles after being shot. The man who had written a name down in a hospital room the moment he could hold a pen. "How long do I have?" Jack said. "He can be here in 40 minutes, Brick said, "or we do it tomorrow. Your call." "Tonight," Jack said immediately. Susan stepped forward. "Mr. Mason, Jack, you came out of surgery this morning. You need to—" "Mrs. Carter." His voice was steady, respectful, but immovable. "There are 2 names that federal prosecutors don't have yet. 2 people who ordered the ambush, who have been running product and buying law enforcement for 6 years, and who are currently aware that Cole is in federal custody and are making decisions right now about what comes next." He looked at her directly. "I am the only person in this building who can close that chain. Tonight is not about being comfortable. Tonight is about making sure that what your daughter did last night means something permanent." Susan looked at him for a long time. She looked at Emily. Emily was looking at Jack. "Okay," Susan said quietly. "We'll wait outside." "No," Jack said, and then softer. "Emily can stay, if she wants." Emily looked at her mother. Susan looked at Emily. And Susan Carter, who had spent 7 years trying to calibrate exactly how much of the world to shield her daughter from, and had gotten the answer catastrophically wrong and in the past 30 hours in every possible direction, said, "Em, it's your choice." Emily said, "I'll stay." Vance arrived in 37 minutes. Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Vance was not what Emily expected, which she realized afterward was a failure of imagination on her part. She had expected something harder, more official, more constructed. Vance was 50-something, compact with reading glasses on a chain around his neck, in the manner of a man who had been doing his specific job for long enough that it had worn away everything performative and left only function. He came in, he shook hands, he sat in the chair that Danny moved to the opposite side of the bed, and he put a small recording device on the bedside table and said, "Whenever you're ready, Jack." Jack said, Gerald Okafor was the bottom of the chain, not the middle. Above him is a man named Preston Hale. He runs a commercial shipping operation out of Eureka, legitimate on paper, 17 years of clean tax filings, 3 civic awards, one of them from the governor's office. Vance was writing. And above Hale, a woman named Cecilia Vero, Jack said. She's a county commissioner in Del Norte County. She has been since 2019. She doesn't appear anywhere near the syndicate. No calls, no meetings, no transfers. You can trace directly. Hale is her firewall. He paused. But 6 months ago, I attended a meeting that neither of them knew I was at, and I recorded 11 minutes of conversation between Hale and a man who works directly for Vero, in which Hale references her by name and role in the distribution chain. He looked at Brick. That recording is on the drive. The room went very quiet. Vance stopped writing. He looked up over his reading glasses. You have her on record. 11 minutes, clear audio. Jack's voice was even. I've been holding that back. If I gave you Hale without Vero, she buries Hale and rebuilds with someone else in 18 months. You need both at the same time. Vance sat back. He looked at the recording device, then at Jack. Why didn't you take this to the Bureau directly 6 months ago when you had it? Because I didn't know how deep Cole went. If I walked into the wrong office with this, it disappeared, and so did I. He paused. I needed a way to make sure it reached someone like you specifically, someone outside the county chain. That took time to arrange. And the ambush was them finding out you were arranging it. Someone talked. Probably Okafor. He had access to enough of my documentation through impound records to piece together that I was building something. Jack's jaw tightened. They moved before I could finish. If I hadn't gone down on Pelican Road, if I'd made it another 3 miles to where I was going. He stopped. But you didn't, Vance said. No. Jack looked at Emily, something quiet in his face. I went into a ditch on Pelican Road. Vance looked at Emily too, registering her properly for the first time, recalibrating whatever he had thought she was. He said to Jack, this is the girl. This is Emily, Jack said. Vance looked at her for a moment with an expression that was professional and private at the same time. Then he said, "The drive contents are already in our system. Once I add Hale and Varro's names with your testimony, I can have warrants issued within the hour." He picked up his recording device. "This is going to move fast, Jack. Tonight." "Good," Jack said. "Move fast." Vance left to make calls. The room settled again, though differently charged now, with the specific energy of things in motion that cannot be stopped. A case building in real time somewhere above their heads, while they sat in a hospital room in the quiet. Emily thought about Cecilia Varro, a county commissioner, civic awards, 17 years of clean paper built over something rotten underneath. She thought about how long things could exist below the surface before someone looked in the right ditch at the right moment. She thought, what if I had run, "You're thinking loud," Jack said. She looked at him. "How can you hear thinking? Your face does a thing, it goes." He made a slight gesture with his free hand, inward. She looked at their hands, still palm to palm. She hadn't noticed she'd been holding on. She hadn't let go since she sat down. "I was thinking about Varro," she said. "How long she's been doing it." "Long time," Jack said. "And nobody knew." "Some people knew. They were afraid." He looked at her steadily. "Fear keeps a lot of things alive that should have died years earlier." She thought about that. "Were you afraid?" she said. "When you were building the case, the 6 months of it?" "Every day," he said. "Every single day." "But you kept going." "Yeah." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I knew what it was costing the people who couldn't fight it themselves. The ones without the resources or the connections or the..." He searched. "The particular life I've lived that makes me harder to get rid of than most." His thumb moved slightly against her hand. "Fear's allowed. Stopping isn't." Emily absorbed this. She filed it in the same place she had filed, "Don't trust anyone, and they always come." And the weight of the lighter under her boot, the collection of things that were going to live in her for a long time, maybe forever, alongside the ditch, water, and the sound of 9 motorcycles, and the way a man's chest felt when it was failing, and the way it felt when it wasn't anymore. "Jack," she said. "Yeah." "After this is over, after Vance has everything and it's done, what do you do?" He looked at the ceiling. "Heal up," he said. "Be you months of that." A pause. "Then I don't know. Something different, maybe." "Different how?" He looked at her. "Less of what got me into that ditch. More of..." He stopped, tried again. "More of whatever this is." She didn't ask him to define it. She thought she already knew. The thing between a man in a ditch and the child who refused to leave him. The thing that didn't have a name in any language she knew yet, but that both of them recognized by feel the way you recognize a sound you've never heard before and know immediately that it matters. The door opened. Danny leaned in. His face was doing something. "Brick, come here." Brick was up and out in 3 seconds. The door closed. Emily looked at Jack. "What is it?" "Don't know yet," he said, but his hand had tightened slightly around hers. 2 minutes passed. The longest 2 minutes since the ditch, possibly. Emily sat in the chair and listened to the monitor and kept her hand where it was and did not ask again. Because asking again would not make the door open faster, and she had learned in the last 30 hours that certain silences were not empty but working, and you had to let them work. The door opened. Brick came back in. His face was different, not in a way that meant danger. Emily registered immediately, but in a way that meant something had shifted again. Something major, something that required a moment to assemble into words. "Varro's moving," Brick said. "Vance's people picked up communication from her office 20 minutes ago. She knows Cole is in custody. She knows Hale is about to be brought in." He paused. "She's attempting to leave the state." Jack sat up straighter. The monitor blipped. "Does Vance?" "Already on it. They flagged her at Arcata Airport 40 minutes ago. She didn't make the flight." Brick looked at Jack with an expression that had traveled a long distance from where it started. "It's done, Jack. She's done. They've got the whole chain." The room was absolutely still. And then Jack Mason, who had been shot twice and driven 6 miles and gone into a ditch and come out of surgery and given testimony from a hospital bed, Jack Mason closed his eyes. He closed them and kept them closed for a long moment, and Emily watched his chest rise and fall with the steady patience of someone who has learned what it means to watch a person breathe and be grateful for every single one. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. He didn't try to hide it. He looked at the ceiling and let it be there the way certain men allow themselves one honest moment when the fight is finally genuinely over. Okay, he said quietly, to himself, to the room, to no one and everyone. Okay, Emily squeezed his hand. He looked at her. I told you, she said. You'll travel again. He made a sound that was half laugh, half something that had no business coming from a man of his specific architecture. He pressed his lips together hard. Yeah, he said. Yeah, you did. Susan came back in at 9. She had spent the 2 hours in the waiting room with Danny, who had apparently talked to her for most of it. Emily would learn later what he said piece by piece over the following weeks, the parts of Jack's story that Susan needed in order to understand the full shape of what her daughter had walked into on Pelican Road. The parts that made it make sense. Susan was not someone who could live comfortably without things making sense. And Danny had given her enough that she could build toward understanding, even if the building would take time. She came in and looked at Emily still in the chair beside Jack's bed, and she looked at their hands and she said nothing about any of it. She sat in the chair by the wall and she looked at Jack directly and said, "Thank you for keeping her safe." Jack looked at her, then at Emily, then at her again. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "with enormous respect, your daughter kept me safe." Susan was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said softly. "I know she did." They left at 9:45. Emily stood up from the chair, and Jack kept her hand for one moment longer before he let go, deliberately, consciously, a choice, not an accident, and then he released it, and she stepped back, and they looked at each other across the small distance of a hospital room, and everything that needed to be said between them had already been said in a ditch on Pelican Road and didn't need repeating. "Thank you," he said. "You too," she said. She walked to the door. She stopped, turned back. Red hair, scar through his eyebrow, she said. "Danny, how did you know what to tell Brick to tell me?" Jack looked at her. A small pause. "Because I needed you to trust the right person. And I needed a signal that would only mean something if it came from me." He paused. "Danny's been with me since I was 26. He would have come to you no matter what. But you needed to know who to let in the door." Emily thought about this, about the logic of trust, how it moves, how it's built, how it's transmitted in the dark between people who have never met, through the only currency that works in desperate situations, which is a specific truth that nobody but the right person would know. She nodded once. She walked out. 3 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in January, a motorcycle pulled up in front of the Carter house. Emily heard it from her room. She knew the sound. She had known it in her bones since October in a way that would probably never fully leave her. The way certain sounds from certain nights take up permanent residence in the body. She went downstairs before her mother. She opened the door. Jack was standing on the porch. He was wearing the same jacket. He looked like himself, fully, completely in a way he hadn't been able to in the hospital room with the IV and the monitor and the pallor of a man recently returned from somewhere he shouldn't have had to go. He was healed. He was himself. He was holding something. A lighter. Not the same one, not the one that had traveled from his jacket to her boot to Brick's fist to a federal evidence locker in Sacramento. A new one, silver, identical in weight and shape, but clean, unmarked, carrying nothing inside it except what he wanted it to carry. He held it out. "I had it made," he said, "same as the original, minus the drive." He paused. "So you have something to remember, if you ever want to." Emily looked at it. She reached out and took it from his hand. It was lighter than she expected. Of course it was. It wasn't carrying anything anymore. Nothing hidden, nothing dangerous, nothing that needed keeping. Just metal. Just weight. Just a thing that had passed between two people on a night that remade them both. She turned it once in her hand. She looked up at him. "I don't need it to remember," she said. Jack looked at her. His jaw moved. "I know," he said. "I know you don't." But she put it in her pocket anyway. Susan appeared in the doorway behind Emily. She looked at Jack. He looked at her. Another negotiation without words. Two adults deciding simultaneously how much of what was real they were willing to let be real in the daylight in January on a porch that had already seen one standoff and didn't need another. Susan said, "There's coffee." Jack said, "Thank you." He came in. He sat at the kitchen's table, not in the father's chair, not in the chair Cole had taken, but in the third chair, the one that had been empty since Emily was 5 years old. the one without a person assigned to it, and Susan made coffee, and Emily sat across from him, and Biscuit came in from wherever cats go during the hours when humans are consuming all available drama, and jumped on the table and stared at Jack with the profound suspicion of an animal that trusts one person and is suspicious of everyone else. Jack looked at the cat. "This is Biscuit." "Yes," Emily said. "She looks mean." "She is. She likes me." "Yeah." He looked at Emily. "I can see why." Outside, January sat on the street the way January does in coastal California, gray and quiet and carrying the smell of rain that hasn't fallen yet. Brick's men were not outside. The federal agents were not in the corridor. Raymond Cole was in a holding facility awaiting trial. Cecilia Vero had entered a plea negotiation that was, according to Danny's most recent text to Brick to Emily, relayed through 3 people and therefore probably partly rumor going very badly for Vero. Preston Hale had cooperated fully and completely the moment federal agents produced 11 minutes of recorded audio and watched his face confirm involuntarily that every word of it was real. The chain was broken. The thing that Jack had carried for 6 months and nearly died for, and trusted to a 7-year-old in a ditch because there was nobody else. That thing had done what it was built to do. And the people it was built to stop were stopped. And the people who had quietly disappeared into fear for years had, according to Vance's last official statement, begun the long process of speaking. None of that undid Pelican Road. None of it unscarred Jack's chest or unfrightened Susan or unaged Emily in the specific way that one night in October had aged her, not old, not jaded, but layered, carrying something now that hadn't been there before, which was the knowledge of exactly what she was capable of when she stopped calculating and simply stayed. But it meant something. It meant everything in the way that things mean everything when they cost enough to make them real. Emily looked at the lighter in her palm. She closed her hand around it. She looked at Jack. She thought about the ditch, about the dark and the cold water, and his hand finding her boot, and the sound of 9 motorcycles coming down a road like a wave. She thought about the first moment, the moment before any of it, the moment when she had looked down from the gravel shoulder and seen him, and everything in her had gone absolutely, completely certain. She hadn't understood then what she was certain of. She had simply been certain. She understood it now. Some things don't need a reason. Some things don't need calculation or courage or the particular life experience that makes a person harder to get rid of than most. Some things only need one person who looks at another person who is scared and alone and decides simply, completely, without negotiation, not to leave. That was all she had done. She had stayed, and a man had lived, and a chain had broken. And a lighter that was no longer carrying anything secret sat in the hand of a 7-year-old girl who had become somewhere between a ditch on Pelican Road and a porch in October, and a hospital room in the dark, something she didn't have the word for yet. She would find the word eventually. For now, she put the lighter in her pocket, and the coffee was ready, and Jack Mason was sitting at the kitchen table, and Biscuit had decided after extensive deliberation to step from the table onto his enormous arm and sit there like she owned it. He looked at Emily with wide, uncertain eyes. "What do I do?" "Nothing," Emily said. "She decided she likes you. You just have to let her." He looked at the cat on his arm. He sat very still the way large men sit when they are trying not to startle something small and specific that has chosen them for reasons they don't fully understand, but know better than to question. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." And outside, January held the street in its gray and careful hands. And inside the house on the ordinary road in the coastal town that most maps still got wrong, something was happening that didn't have a name on any official document, not in Vance's files, not in Cole's arrest record, not in the evidence chain that had traveled from a drainage ditch to a federal office in Sacramento. Something quiet, something real, something that had started in the worst possible moment with the simplest possible words. "I won't leave you." A child had said that to a dying man in the dark and meant it and held on, and the holding had changed everything. Not because she was extraordinary in the way that stories require their heroes to be extraordinary, made of different material, built for larger purposes, but because she was ordinary in the deepest sense, a 7-year-old girl with red boots and a strawberry hair tie and a stubborn, unshakable, absolute refusal to let someone be afraid alone. That was all. That was everything. That was enough.